Hello, everyone. We are here today with Courtney Gilard, our invitee from United States, Massachusetts, Pittsfield. So thank you very much, Courtney, to accept our invitation to be with us today and talk a little bit about your experience. Thank you also, Sylvia and Daniela, to be together with us here in this work, in this morning here in Brazil. I think it's morning also in Massachusetts. So welcome, Courtney.
Thank you so much for having me. And I want to just say thank you so much for all your advocacy work and the work that you're doing. And I think reaching out to other grassroots organizations that are also standing up for wireless safety and advocating for health and doing this work is so important. And connecting these groups is vital to our success because, like my story, like many people's stories, until you have a cell tower permit that is facing your neighborhood or your community, or until you're harmed by wireless radiation, or until a cell tower goes up outside your house without any notification, often many people are not educated or aware about this issue. And so it's so important for us to be proactive, to be educators, and to make connections so that we can learn from each other. So thank you so much for having me this morning.
You're welcome. So Courtney, tell us how all this movement starts, what year this movement starts. Tell a little bit about the story of Pittsfield and the tower and the movement of the citizens.
Thank you. So I'm here in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. We have a Facebook page if people want to learn a little bit more, www.facebook.com/Pittsfield Cell, PITTSFIELD CELL. And the Facebook page really chronicles our journey of last year, the first day of the COVID shutdown. Can you imagine? So we're back in March of 2020. The girls are sent home from school. I'm working as an early childhood educator at the Lenox Library, and it closes. So I lose my job. We're just closed. We're on stay-at-home orders. And we live on a tiny dead-end street. There's literally 4 houses on our road. And we see trucks coming up the road. And these are big, heavy, earth-moving trucks. And literally one tries to make the corner and breaks the water main. And now the road is blocked with, a truck that is so big that it's collapsed the water main. We don't have water. We can't get our cars. We're like, this is a pretty big construction project. Like, what is going on? And because the kids are at home and we're working from home, or I'm not working right now, we're noticing what's happening, and we're calling into our city councilors and we're saying, do you know what's happening? And we're asking our neighbors, do you know what's happening? No one knows what's happening, and they're guessing, right? Maybe they're building a house. Maybe they're building a solar array. Maybe it's a training facility for the firefighters. And we call the DPW, we call the city hall, and eventually we call the phone number on the side of the truck that's driving by, and we say, you're building it, you must know what's going on. And they say, it's a cell tower. And we're like, what do you mean it's a cell tower? None of us received any notification. Aren't you supposed to tell people before you build a tower in a neighborhood? And they say, we have a permit from 2017. So back in 2017, they were supposed to issue a series of 4 letters from the Zoning Board of Appeal to let 300-foot legally invested abutters know about this proposed construction so they could turn up to meetings and have a voice at the table. None of that happened. The closest abutter was identified over on Laurie Court as a 500-foot abutter. And because none of us received any notification, a deceptive address was used, the address of 877 South Street, and I'll show you those slides in a moment. It was so far away from our Holmes Road neighborhood that even if you had seen maybe a mention at City Hall, if you had the time to go through those documents, you would never think that a South Street cell tower would affect a Holmes Road neighborhood. So we contacted our mayor, our state representative. We reached out to our legislators and our elected officials, and we begged them for help. Hey, there's a cell tower. There's no notification. The law says you need to send notifications in order to get a permit. That did not happen. Can we pause this because it's COVID? We understand this is the start of a global pandemic and all hands need to be on deck. Instead of pausing it, they ignored us. As more and more abutters came forward saying we never received any notification, there was no community transparency, there was no news article written about this tower, there was no letters to the editors that were sent, and there was no voice at the permitting table for us in 2017. We expected that our city would take action on our behalf. Instead, they told us to hire a lawyer. And we said, it's the middle of a pandemic. Like, I just lost my job. Like, we can't go door to door and, try and organize. And the tower people, instead of building a 4,000-foot road from 877 South Street to the tower site, looked on the map and came to my house, cut down 30 trees at the top of the street, wood chipped them, and made an illegal road to put this tower up, and called us collateral damage and people of low value living on land of low value, and that the tower would be up and on before we ever had a chance to organize. So these are some of the deceptive permitting processes and building processes. Now, luckily, we had an amazing head of the DPW, Ricardo Morales, and he came up and said, you can't build it through this access point. And he put up police tape, and they took the police tape down. And he put up a sign, and it said, no access. And they took the sign down. So he came up with a Jersey barrier, one of those big concrete blocks, and they still managed to get their trucks around. And it was like this little text message chain. We'd see that somebody would see the trucks on Holmes Road and then Plum Street, and they would all contact. And then I would go up with my camera, or I'd use my car, and I would block the road. And never at any point did the city say, you need to not, they said you need to not do it, but they weren't forceful or enforced fines or paused the construction. And ultimately, Verizon did get the tower up and on. Now, we didn't know when the tower would be actually transmitting, but we didn't need to, because my daughter, who just turned 10 years old, came downstairs and said, Mommy, my head is feeling dizzy, buzzy, and headachy. Another neighbor woke up in AFib. His heart was skipping a beat. And another set of neighbors had rolling headaches. And there was a sign on the tower with a tower number and a phone number. And I got onto a tech down in Texas who didn't know me and didn't know the issues surrounding the tower, and was able to confirm that the day that my daughter experienced those symptoms were the day that they fired up the tower. So we come from a neighborhood where there was very low levels of ambient radiation. If you have a safe and sound meter, we were in the green, very low, 0.0004. So we were able to test prior to the tower going up, and then afterwards. Now we have 500,000% more radiation, more RF EMF radiation in this neighborhood than before. So, while it may be under the FCC guidelines for what their limits are, it's definitely in excess of anything that we have ever felt before. And because many people up here choose to not have technology, many people here don't have, Wi-Fi or choose to carry a cell phone, the effects were pretty noticeable. And so we have been reporting our concerns to our health department, and without any support for the last 8 months. And finally, last night, we had a Board of Health meeting, and they made a decision to escalate it to the Massachusetts Department of Public Health for an investigation, which we have very little faith that it will result in anything meaningful for our community. But I'd like to show you the video of my 13-year-old daughter doing testimony last night, if you would like to see that.
Please let us know. What have you been doing to help us? We've been calling in for months because we need your help. I asked my mom what has changed between calling in to open comments 2 weeks ago on January 12th to now, or calling in last month to now, or even August to now? Is it working? Are our voices being heard? Is the city responding? From what I see, nothing has happened. I've called in to ask you, as those that represent our voices and protect our health, to do something about this. This cell tower has been a problem for months. I've been letting you know for months. I'm asking you for your help. At first, I lost the safe neighborhood I grew up in. Then I lost my health. Then I lost my neighbors who moved out. Then I lost my home when we started sleeping on the floor elsewhere. Then I lost my childhood to regular doctor's appointments, blood draws, and missing school because I have headaches and nausea, insomnia, and dizziness. Why would I want to live next to a cell tower when it causes health issues, among other things? Why would you allow them to go up next to homes when they could be placed safely away from them? And why, Mayor Tyre and the Board of Health, why would I want to stay in a city that ignores its children? Please help us. Thank you.
So you can hear my 13-year-old daughter's cries for help. And we have been calling regularly into open comments at our city council meeting since the summer, since we discovered that the tower was creating biological health effects, not just in my family, but in 13 other neighbors. And since the tower has been transmitting, we have had 2 cancer diagnoses in the neighborhood, both with people who have had previous clean scans. So they didn't have any evidence of cancer. And then after living with the cell tower, they have cancer. Now, are the 2 related? We have footage of Senator Ed Markey speaking with Cecilia Doucette, who you just spoke with recently, of Massachusetts for Safe Technology, saying that he commissioned a study 15, 20 years ago on the effects of wireless radiation, and that he is aware that RF EMF, radio frequency EMFs, are a co-carcinogen. So while they may not create cancer on their own, they speed up tumor formation, and the rate in which people perhaps have a tendency to form cancer cells to accelerate that process. And we've had Dr. Paul Heroux of McGill University in Canada speak to our city councilors and speak on some local podcasts, which we've been on recently, also educating us about the health effects of these cell towers, because Verizon wants to tell you their standard line. When we called Verizon, the standard line was, we deal with frequencies, we don't deal with people, and the towers are operating within FCC standards. There are simply, as the Massachusetts Department of Public Health has told us, there are simply too many towers to go around monitoring. And as we know here in America, any oversight or any monitoring of towers has been disbanded. And it's up to us here in the States, and I don't know what your regulations are in Brazil and where all of you are, but right now, we do have municipal control over placement of cell towers. And we can allow permits with the caveat of ensuring that there is independent RF testing of every single tower that goes up, perhaps quarterly or 3 times a year, or at a minimum twice a year, with an independent engineer who can come out and certify the levels that these towers are operating at. And then you can compare those to the building biology standards. You can compare those to international standards for emissions that are lower than perhaps what the regulatory bodies are saying are standards. And I want to use the word standards because they are not safety standards. The FCC is not a health and safety organization. It is a telecommunications organization. Their job is to roll out technology. Nobody is looking out for our children. Nobody is looking out for the health of our people, of our planet, of our pollinators, and nobody is calling them, well, I want to say nobody, because there is the lawsuit right now, as you know, FCC, with the Environmental Health Trust, Children's Health Defense, that is moving forward, calling for accountability, that doctors, that health organizations, that the Council of Mayors, that the American Academy of Pediatrics, that they are holding the FCC accountable for the wireless harm that we know through the independent science has been documented and is consistent in whatever country you are. When a cell tower goes up, we're hearing stories from all around the world: headaches, dizziness, nausea, ringing in the ears. People are having palpitations, cardiac issues. And now we're able to do some blood tests. Now we're able to do some MRIs, and we're able to pinpoint the oxidative stress and the mechanisms for non-ionizing radiation creating this harm. And there have been studies that have gone up in neighborhoods where cell towers have been constructed to show that, these things are issues, and distance is helpful. The farther away we are, the less we feel these effects. But really, this is technology where the cumulative effects of this radiation has never been studied, because it just hasn't been around that long. And if we cannot say definitively that it is safe, we should not be permitting them for next to our homes where our children rest their heads.
Courtney, you said that the measurement with the safe and sound meter before the tower was 0.004. That's it?
Yeah. Yeah, we had low levels. Yes.
0.004 microwatt per square meter before the tower.
Correct.
And after the tower, you did a measurement?
We had like 9.0.
9.0, so 500 more than.
If we did the math, it comes out to be, if you look at what the percentage increase is, it's like 500,000% more radio frequency radiation. So, there are acupuncturists who base their practice, right? There are energy workers who base their practice on being able to sense and feel energy and move it through the body. We have these indigenous forms of wisdom where people are really connected into the energy systems of the body. Whether you believe in it or not, you have ancient traditions that tell us that we are energetic beings. There was a book that I read in 8th grade called The Body Electric. We know that we are electric human beings and that our bodies respond to electric fields. That's why we're told if we have a pacemaker, we need to stay away from other radiating devices, right? And now we're starting to see iPhone getting called out for the iPhone must be held a certain number of inches away from the body because of health effects, that it interferes with the pacemaker device. So we know that we can use radio frequencies therapeutically in surgeries and in other applications. And doctors have to be very precise with these medical applications. We've been working with a cardiologist and a board-certified internist down in Louisiana, Dr. Prashanti Alturi, who speaks to this issue. So we know that our bodies are affected by electromagnetic fields. And there are studies and there are science out there. One of the things is my daughter's, she's a February birthday. So we discovered this tower and she had a Zoom well child checkup because it was during the pandemic. And when she left the room, I asked the pediatrician, hey, they're building a cell tower out here. What do you know about this? And she said, have you read the American Academy of Pediatrics position statement on cell towers? And I said, no, I didn't even know the American Academy of Pediatrics had a position statement on cell towers, right? I didn't know that there was this wealth of data around the science and the studies of cell towers, because surely if the science existed, there would be legislative protections that also existed. And the reality was there was no connection between the two. We have the science and we know what we know, but it doesn't translate into protections. And we're starting to see municipalities now starting to say, time out. We don't want Wi-Fi. We don't want 5G in our community. Hold on. We don't want Wi-Fi in our schools or cell towers on our schools. We need to protect the health and wellness of our children. What is this doing to them? Are there any long-term studies on the cumulative effects of wireless radiation? And seeing that there are not, let's take the precautionary principles. So our pediatrician showed us the American Academy of Pediatric position statement saying that living within 500 meters of a cell tower of a mast, children experienced more headaches, dizziness, insomnia, palpitations, everything that we were experiencing. I mean, this to me is like, we have the science. It's a no-brainer. Don't put these things around children. It's as simple as that. With our cell phones and our Wi-Fi routers and what we have in our own houses, we have the ability to turn it off. We have the ability to turn our homes into sanctuaries. And if we are fortunate enough to live far enough from neighbors, we can minimize the health effects of what we are being exposed to in our own homes. But when they build a tower outside your house that you do not consent to, that you're essentially being a guinea pig for, that there is no science to tell you that this is safe, only science to the contrary, telling you that there's animal studies, and now there's epidemiological studies in human beings showing the mechanisms for harm. This needs to be addressed. And it is addressed through these forums right here. What you're doing with this live broadcast, you're doing the work of this education. And we need to talk about it, right? And my daughter, my family, we've been called names. We have had people push back against what we have shared. But for the most part, it has been greeted with an openness and willingness to learn about electromagnetic sensitivity, to learn that there are international diagnostic codes for these harms due to non-ionizing radiation, that there is a EMF medical conference that trains doctors in the science and how to recognize the symptoms and educate people about their wireless use in order to best protect their health. Because as you know, cancer rates are on the rise, right? So brain cancers, gliomas, especially in young adults. We work with Cindy Russell, who she's a surgeon in California, Physicians for Safe Technology. And she was finding that when women were putting their cell phones in their bras, that's where they were getting their tumors. And she was finding breast cancers in younger women. And this was alarming to her. And so she started getting involved in advocacy and education work around this wireless safety issue. So unless we talk about it, we can't make a difference.
Courtney, how the movement with the neighbors started when you started telling people and people right away believe it, or they did not believe it? How was how the community joined in this movement?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So not everybody cares about wireless radiation. And I think if you are in your community saying, I'm the only voice for that, that's fine. Be the only voice for that. A mosquito is tiny, but it can make an incredible impact if you're alone in bed with one, right? So, everybody, and I'll do my slideshow. I'll get to my slideshow in a minute, and I'll show you, everybody has different concerns about cell towers. For some people, they don't like the aesthetic of them. It's an ugly industrial structure being imposed in a beautiful residential area. And so some people are concerned that they have to see it. And that's why you see these cell towers these days being disguised as monopines instead of monopoles, that they are disguised as trees. So people will hopefully not see them and they'll blend into the environment. Now, if you are a person who's in the category of being conscientious about your health, and perhaps you make good choices for your family and you're safety conscious, like in my family, we wear our seatbelts, we eat organic foods, we make sure that we exercise regularly, we engage in preventative health practices like seeing the dentist, and doing well child checkups. So we are a family who's conscientious about our health, and we choose, right, to live in this location because there was not a cell tower and there was not infrastructure. So we were concerned about health effects. Some of the neighbors were worried about property values. If they were to sell their home, would their house price go down? Would anybody want to buy a home next to a cell tower? Some people were worried that towers collapse regularly. And here in the Berkshires, we've had them. Some people were worried about catching fire because this is a very big metal pole, higher than all the trees, and we do have lightning strikes, and often these things do catch on fire. And what happens to the safe and secure residential qualities of a neighborhood when you introduce this kind of infrastructure? So everybody had different concerns about it, and I think people participated in their own way. We had one neighbor start the GoFundMe. We had one neighbor start a petition. We had people who were 300-foot legal abutters who did not receive the notification start writing to the mayor and the city councilors and the legislators. Everybody, I think, found their niche. Somebody called the media. It's really important to share your story and get it out there in the public eye. And so we had one person just specifically reaching out to the news reporters, asking them to cover the story. We had one neighbor who was on yard sign duty. They got to design the yard sign. We had one person on website duty. It does take a village. There's a lot of effort that goes into grassroots organization, and it takes all voices. And so, when people get involved, everybody cares about something a little bit different. Sometimes people care about their kids. We have elderly people here who are like, we're old. We have so much to worry about. We're not going to worry about a tower. And we had a neighbor recently here. I think I shared we had 2 cases of cancer. They weren't too concerned about the tower because of their distance from it. The woman, unfortunately, has now been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And now she's very worried about the tower. And she's very worried, is there a connection? Is there a correlation or a causation? And what we worry about is not only the environmental toxicity of the cell tower itself or the carcinogenesis that can happen when you're exposed to radiofrequency radiation, but how does this intersect with other environmental toxins? So for example, here in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, we were a General Electric. That was our big industry. They were big into PCBs. When the roads got too dusty, they would spray them down with PCBs, these chemicals which leached into our soil and into our waterways. So do we have a higher incidence of cancer because we have some kind of pre-existing environmental exposure that will heighten our sensitivity now? So are there other environmental factors that come into play and intersect the wireless radiation issue? If your immune system is already compromised because you're dealing with other environmental stresses and toxins, and then you layer it, it is like a scaffolding effect. And so we want to minimize, right, our exposure to those things. So things like mosquito spraying with the forever chemicals, the glyphosates, the Roundup, the things like that people are using on the soil. What is the cumulative impact when you layer these environmental toxins on top of each other? And the answer is we simply don't know. And if we don't know, we need to take precaution. So people got involved in all the levels that they could, which was really wonderful to see. I think as time goes on, the people in other neighborhoods go, well, it doesn't affect me and my family, but what does affect them is that if it can happen to us, and we're just your average blue collar, hardworking families, it could happen to them and it could happen to you because we never thought it could happen. And so what we want to educate people is that we need to get in front of these issues, because for us, fighting a cell phone tower that's already up is darn near impossible. But fighting a permit and being able to have a permit denied, or to be able to have a telecom company pull a permit because you're asking the right questions or you're holding them accountable for radio frequency emissions testing, or you're holding them accountable to making sure that they have insurance. So if people in the neighborhood do develop symptoms, the municipality is not responsible to incur those health costs. So there are things that people can do, but they need to, one, be educated, and two, care enough to get involved. And then three, be strong enough to be able to answer the questions when people say, are you sure this is a real thing? They need to be able to provide them with the science to be able to speak effectively around this issue without being called a conspiracy theorist or a kook or a woo-woo, or like, wrap your head in tinfoil, or, whatever it is. This is a very serious, debilitating condition. And there is controversy over how many people in our population are affected by this. The numbers I have seen range anywhere from 3% to 23%. And with wireless infrastructure encroaching more and more on residential areas, and this electrosmog, which is now blanketing our planet, I think we're going to see many more people fall into the category of recognizing that they do have some sensitivity in some form to wireless devices. And I think what we're going to see, which is so important, I think what we're going to see is medical doctors, when you go for your intake, if you guys have had a physical lately, have you seen the form, right, that says, do you eat fruits and vegetables? Do you smoke? Do you drink? Do you, do you practice these, safety, things that, are protective for your health? I even had a medical intake, and I think it's because I'm in my 40s now. So I'm so old that they asked me, do I have hand railings on my stairs? Have I corrected any trip and fall hazards in my home? Have I secured any loose carpet? They want to protect us and make sure that we're safe. But do they ever ask us how many hours do we spend speaking on a cell phone or on a laptop without an Ethernet connection? Or do we live next to a cell tower radiation? So we're starting to see doctors and pediatricians now asking. And if your doctor doesn't ask you these questions, ask your doctor to add it to their intake forms. Because my background is I have a degree in biology. And I also have a degree in natural medicine from the Australian College of Natural Medicine. So I'm a naturopath, and I practice health education. I've worked for Hilton International, Living Well International, Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health as a health educator and advocate. And I'll tell you, I do think that wireless radiation is the missing link. I have worked with people who have the best diets, the best lifestyle practices, the best sleep hygiene. Talk about aromatherapy, meditations, affirmations, lavender baths, you name it, and who still cannot fall asleep at night. And when you take the cell phone and you turn it off, put it on wireless mode, put it in the other room, get rid of it altogether, turn the wireless router off, disconnect the Wi-Fi from the house, it is like they have a new lease on life. It is like night and day, and no one tells us this. No one tells us. And, I think we have all these fancy detoxes out there, right? You can detox from sugar, from gluten, from dairy, from caffeine, from alcohol. It costs nothing to do a wireless detox and try for yourself the effects of turning off the wireless and notice your children's behaviors. Notice, right, your own agitations, your own, physical health and well-being. Notice your sleep patterns. Try it. It doesn't cost a lot, but it can make an enormous impact. And I think now our conversations are starting to go in these directions. And the presentation, sure. Let's pull up the slide deck. I'd like to show with you.
I don't know if Daniela has a question. Daniela, you saying something? Your mic is off, Daniela.
Can I just say something too? I think what you were speaking is extremely important. For me, one of the ways that I felt, oh my God, it's exactly what is happening to me, is when I stopped sleeping with my cell phone in the room, because I slept with my cell phone right next to my head, and I never knew it was a problem. And when I stopped doing that, my life changed, because I didn't feel that fatigue that I was feeling for so long. I even started doing acupuncture because of this, but I didn't know what was the source of it. And then when I stopped doing this, and then cabling the computers here at home for my kids too, our life changed, and I feel like a different person now. I feel younger. It's incredible.
And I think it's so important to share that. So thank you so much for sharing your experience with that, because often people have chronic health complaints. And here in America, we spend the most money per capita on person for healthcare, and yet we are rated one of the lowest in terms of health and vitality, right? It is not translating the money that we spend per person on healthcare to the actual health outcomes that we're experiencing. And so to have that awareness is so powerful, because all the time, how many of us have known somebody who has lost their life too early to cancer? How many of us know a parent who has had a child with a glioblastoma, a brain tumor, leukemia, right? And has had to watch that child suffer and had to make funeral arrangements for that child. And we are asking for our governments to dedicate more money for cancer treatment for children. Only 10% of the budget is dedicated to children. Why are we not doing the wireless education work on this end to prevent it? Instead of asking for the money for more advanced treatments, why are we putting cell phones, wireless devices, baby monitors, Fitbits? We're putting it in diapers. We're putting it right next to their heads. We are saturating our children from the moment of conception, when we have our laptops and our iPads on our bodies. We're saturating our children, and we're seeing now the studies of the maternal exposure to radio frequency radiation and health outcomes. We're seeing it on autism. We are seeing this. And some of us never make the connection. I was given a Fitbit. I was given a wireless tracker, right, for my exercise. And I loved it. It was my Christmas present. It brought me so much joy. It was fancy. I got to the gym. I tracked my steps. It had a function to tell you how well you slept. I put it on my wrist and I went to bed, and I said, it's supposed to help me sleep. I'm not getting any sleep. And it's in my kitchen drawer. I can't wear the thing. And maybe that was my first sign that I was sensitive to wireless radiation. I'm putting this on to track my sleep, but I'm sleeping worse. What's up with this? And I think other people have had that experience of palpitations or increased anxiety, depressive symptoms, things like that, that we just chalk up to growing old or maybe stress. But when we remove these sources, it is amazing how the brain fog clears, how we feel more energized, we're more restful. I don't know why we're not all doing this, other than telecommunication feeds us the line that we have the latest and greatest phone and you need to upgrade every 6 months. And so we're hearing this through media, and every time we turn on the TV, right, we get another 5G Verizon ad telling you, free unlimited talk time for you and your families. My children and I created some Verizon ads saying free unlimited headaches, nausea, insomnia, and dizziness. So, know what's really free with your Verizon package, because you don't want to be the family who's facing down the glioblastoma diagnosis. And then Make-A-Wish Foundation is putting technology into the hands of our children because they want to stay connected, which is so beautiful, but they're not teaching them to do what we have to do at home, which is it's an Ethernet connection. It's low cost and it protects our health. It reduces the amount of radio frequency radiation that we're exposed to. And it's not a hard thing to do, but we're not teaching our families and our kids. And we have a right to know. We absolutely have the right to know. And they're withholding this information from us. And then, the firefighters, they don't want the 5G on top of their antennas on their stations, right? Because they're already exposed, right? Think about what firefighters are exposed to in terms of firefighting chemicals. Again, we're seeing this layering effects of all the environmental toxins. Now you put antennas on their stations and they're saying, I forgot what I was doing. I've been a firefighter for years and I got in the truck and I couldn't figure out what I was doing. I can't remember how to perform CPR. I'm tired and I'm sluggish and I've never had this before. And they did the brain scans and they found the issues. And Verizon and big tech is using the same playbook as the smoking industry. The smoking industry gave free cigarettes to all the physicians to say, ours is better for your throat. Ours has no aftertaste. And they put in the Journal of American Medicine all their cigarette ads. So they sponsored the physicians and they gave them free cigarettes. And you know what Verizon's doing? They're giving free 5G phones and service to all of our first responders. And so, here it is. It's a Trojan horse. It looks like it's an act of generosity and kindness. And actually, it is sabotaging people's health. And we need to call the industry out on this however we can.
Yeah, we see a lot of things in common with the smoking industry and how the society was seeing the cigarettes and the tobacco in last century. So a lot of people saying that's good for health. That's the people that's saying that smoking is bad for health. They are paranoia. They have paranoia. They are conspiracy theory. So it seems like the new tobacco. Seems that like the electrosmog's the new tobacco.
That's exactly what it is, and it was the same thing with the building industry with asbestos. Asbestos was amazing. We could have this building material and it wouldn't catch on fire. And the workers who started to come down with lung cancer all knew, what do we all have in common? Well, we're working with this asbestos. It took 30, 40, 50 years. Agent Orange, the same thing. We just did a podcast yesterday with William Sturgeon, who's this amazing local, he used to be in law and he's been involved with city politics for years and years, but he's a Vietnam vet and he suffered from Agent Orange. And again, they were told, you're crazy. There's no problems with you. And yet everybody was having diabetes and heart issues and other issues. And they knew, but it was a cover up. So it takes years to be able to translate what we know into actionable policies and protections. And we're not learning from our mistakes. We're not using the example of big tobacco or of drugs like thalidomide or the Roundup. We're seeing the lawsuits in court right now. It's cheaper for them to pay out people who have suffered with cancer than it is to make changes. And so Verizon, to its shareholders, says, we are at a place where we can lose money because of the health effects and loss of life through our products. But they would rather privately pay out a telecom worker who has been diagnosed with cancer, a 26-year-old young guy who works on towers, leukemia, which is terminal. They'd rather pay him out than actually educate people and make it safer for all of us. And that's just wrong. So we need to call out the industry on these shenanigans. It's absolutely ridiculous. So you're right. It's the big tobacco playbook all over again. And, you know, there's so much lobbying and there's so much money that our politicians are taking from telecom that they're blinded. Their job is public service. Their job is public health. But instead, they're making this about the financial gain. And we're saying, oh, the technology is so wonderful. We're going to be more productive. We're going to have everybody connected. It's this Internet of Things.
And faster and faster and faster connections.
When in reality, the 5G is not any more faster.
Yeah,
it's an environmental drain. You know, the cable fiber optics is the way, of the future, and it's going to be safer for everyone.
Hi, Courtney.
Hi.
My name is Daniela, and I was diagnosed with EHS when I was living in Toronto. So the area I was living was close to downtown, and I started to feel after my pregnancy very debilitated, brain fog, and I was having heart palpitations. And also, I would feel like goosebumps all over my body and through my cervical spine. So then I went to, doctors and to do the checkups, and nothing showed up. But one doctor told me that he couldn't tell their clients it was because of the Wi-Fi. And then he started to explain me that Wi-Fi, microwave radiation was created to use in the concentration camps in Auschwitz to reduce the polio disease that was being spreaded in the concentration camps, especially among the soldiers, right? So that was pretty scary to me at the time. And even though he explained everything, the beginning, and Siemens were the engineer guys that started that microwave radiation, and it was very heavy and scary. I couldn't believe that my cell phone was making me sick. But then I realized it was not only the cell phone; it was like on top of that was like the routers.
Yep.
And then the smart meter, and also the I started to look around in my neighborhood. We had towers on top of the buildings everywhere. It was even hard to count them. And they show up, and they don't do like public consultation. We don't have the real information what wireless radiation is all about in the spectrum, in the electromagnetic spectrum. And the only thing they said is about that there is no heat effect as the ionized radiation. But they don't tell us that it affects the membrane cell, which is kind of deeper at the first, right? Then a more substantial heating effect on the skin that you can notice right away. So I'm just saying to you that I'm another testimonial to your movement, because that is real. And that I went to the first EMF conference as well in California. And my mentors, I would say that my mentors were Dr. Magda Havas and Sheena. Yeah. And then they put me together with other doctors in Canada, and Environmental Health Clinic, which had a lineup of 2 years to get the first appointment. Just so you have an idea of how crowded it was already. So I had to fly to Dallas to Dr. William Ray. And then we decided to move here to Brazil not that I don't feel it here, but I don't live in a big city anymore. So I'm in the outskirts in the more countryside. But it's not because that I left that environment that you have a peace of mind, because schools here in Brazil are starting to get Wi-Fi and Google School, and everything is starting to go online. And especially now with the pandemic, everybody's having their remote classes using Wi-Fi. So would you have anything to say to parents right now about the radiation levels that are installed in the schools, if there is any guidelines as well in your city with that, on that regard, please?
Yes, so those are great questions. And thank you for sharing your testimony, because it's the most important thing, both of you who have shared your stories about being aware of the wireless harms and how it biologically impacts you and what symptoms you have. It is validating. And I think when people first discover this, they question themselves. Am I really feeling this? Is this real? Is it in my head? Is it psychosomatic that when I move my cell phone into another room that I sleep better? Am I projecting this? What is this that's real? What is this that's not? I think there's fear, fear of, will I ever be able to, for me, I had a sense, right, with my Fitbit that it was not helping me sleep at all. And I knew I slept better without it, right? But I didn't know I was sensitive to wireless harm until the tower went up and I started having palpitations. And my doctors were like, are you sure it's not anxiety? And I'm like, I'm a yoga teacher. I'm pretty in tune with my body. I have a sense of when I have anxiety, or like when I'm stressed, like what are the systems of my body? For me, it's my stomach, that's my weak area. So I was having all these symptoms that were not usual for me under a normal stress response. And they even said, you might want to see a therapist about this. And I said, sure, I'll talk to the therapist about this. We'll go through that line, but it makes you feel alone. And it makes you feel like I'm the only one. So to share your story and to say, hey, listen, I had to go to doctors. I had to wait for 2 years on a waiting list. I had to fly to this clinic. This is so important to validate people's experience, because we know when people with invisible disabilities are marginalized, are made to feel less than, are not able to be treated by their physicians, or are told that this is in their heads, this is damaging. And this year, right around my daughter's birthday, I was reading Daphne Tackover, who is one of the lawyers, along with Scott McCullough, for Children's Health Defense Against FCC. She had put out a blog. And I think I shared Amelia as a February baby around Valentine's Day. And so she shared this blog that this gentleman in Germany could no longer tolerate the pain of 4G, and that he committed suicide. He had been living in his car. He had been living in a way that, tried to support him, but he was living in a society that did not understand this illness, and that the pain of 4G was so great that it chose him. It chose, his fate of, of this awful, awful outcome. And she also shared a 15-year-old girl who was sensitive to the Wi-Fi in her school, also took her own life. She died by suicide when people did not believe her or take her seriously. And the media spun this story and said if the mother hadn't put in her head that she was sensitive to the Wi-Fi, she would not have died by suicide. And at that point, I had to sit my own daughters down and say, girls, should we just move and not ever talk about the cell tower again and get out of this situation and not become vocal advocates and not put our faces out there on this? Because people started thinking maybe this woman's got Munchausen by proxy, a psychological condition where you put these attributes onto your children. And my 13-year-old sat me down at the dinner table and she said to me, Mama, You are the most uncool person I have ever met, and you are not an influencer. You cannot influence me and my sister into having these symptoms. These are real. This is what we're experiencing, and we're going to tell other people about it in the efforts to educate and prevent this from happening to another child or another family. And I was so proud of my children for being advocates and giving me the courage to speak out. She says, Mama, you're not cool. I'm sorry. You have no power to influence us. These headaches and this, you can't tell us what to wear. You can't tell us how to brush our hair. And you definitely can't tell us, no, this is what we're feeling and this is real. So for you guys to validate it and to do this work and share your experience, you give other people permission and you actually throw them a lifeline. And this is vital.
Courtney, I have a question. You guys did the measurement before 0.004 microwatts and then 9 microwatts per square meter.
Correct.
And if we see the FCC limits, it's, I'm not sure, but something around 12 million microwatts. Is it correct?
I don't know, and I haven't gotten into the meter reads in that way because we know that the standards are here, right? And we know that the biological damage is here to the low level EMF exposures.
Exactly.
And so, I don't even get into those numbers or debate them because, as you said, they're so antiquated based on the dummy with the liquid head and the heating effects. We're not studying, we're not looking in the right direction. Now we have the science to look in the right direction, but we're ignoring it. And we can't ignore it any longer because we are the evidence, because our children and you and I and all of us who feel this or who have had loved ones who perhaps have been diagnosed with a cancer on this side of their body, right here. If the antenna is here, the cancer is here. If the antenna is here, then the cancer is here. This is a no-brainer. We can put 2 and 2 together. We don't have to guess any longer. We have the science, we have the data, and now we have to get the information out into the hands of the consumers, and we need to create informed consent because my child cannot go ice skating without me signing a consent form, letting us know that if she falls on the ice, she's going to get herself hurt. And that would seem obvious if you put, blades on your feet on the ice, you could get hurt. I make my children wear a helmet. We take precautions. So it's not that we don't engage in ice skating because it could be harmful, or we don't drive a car because it could be harmful, but we choose what kind of vehicle we want to drive in. We make sure it has airbags and seat belts. We make sure we go the speed limits and we understand what we are dealing with. And with phones and wireless technology and cell towers, the information's out there. But they're just not telling you what we're dealing with. And, under FCC right now, we can't talk about health and environmental effects, and we all should be. So when we did our presentation to the Community Development Board, we had to talk about everything else. And so with this presentation, it might help your crew if you're trying to get a permit denied or you're trying to get setbacks in your communities. And talking to Daniela's issue about cell tower radiations in schools. We have many places here in America where now you cannot put a cell tower 3,000 feet from a school, a park, or a playing ground. And we can say, not because of health, but we can say these are sensitive areas and we need to be cautious about them. We can tell telecom where they can build towers, which is great. So your municipal zoning needs to be able to say, listen, this is where it's okay to put a tower and this is where it's not, because under FCC, you cannot discriminate between providers. You can't say AT&T goes here and Verizon goes here and Sprint Wireless goes here. You can't discriminate, but you can say, these are our parameters and this is what we're asking you to do. And there's 20 good reasons under FCC why a permit can be denied. Now, FCC is trying to revoke those, right? So they're trying to say that national historic protection of monuments and treasures, right? If you blight something. So for example, Have you guys heard of the great American writer Herman Melville? He wrote the book Moby Dick. This is one of the great American novels written at the time of the Industrial Revolution. Herman Melville was a writer in New York City, and he escaped a cholera pandemic by coming to Pittsfield, Massachusetts, right down the street. His uncle had a farm. And so they escaped the pandemic by coming to the farm. Now, Melville fell in love with the area. Train lines were coming through, power lines were coming through everywhere. New York City infrastructure was going up. He called it a blight on this beautiful, beautiful landscape. And so he sat here right down the street and he wrote this book looking at the white-capped mountains of Berkshire County and equating them to the rolling waves of the ocean. And he wrote about this maniacal Captain Ahab, who was in search of this great white whale that had battled with him and took his leg. And at the end of the book, Captain Ahab is taken, his life is taken by the great white whale. And Herman Melville says, nature will always win. Man is trying to control the environment. Man is trying to control everything. But in the end, nature will prevail. And now when you pull into Herman Melville's historic Arrowhead, a National Historic Treasure on the registry, you see a cell tower. Herman Melville will be rolling over in his grave to think that his homestead, his farm, his sacred space that was not to be blighted. Now you pull in the driveway and you say, oh, look, there's a cell tower at the top of your walking trails. This is wrong on so many levels. And FCC is looking to take away those protections from Indigenous First Nation people. So they have the ability to protect their land as well as these National Historic Treasures. And they're saying, no, we're allowed to put them wherever we please. And it takes people like us and the Environmental Health Trust and these incredible lawyers to say, there are places in this planet that we need to protect. Schools are one of them. Historic monuments are another one. First Nations land is another one. And so we need to give them parameters where they can put these towers and where they can't. And they can't just blindly roll this out. It's not working for anyone.
Courtney, do you want to show your presentation?
Yeah, let's go through the slides quickly and see if it's helpful to any of you who are fighting towers. Now, we have been referred to as David and Goliath, this big epic struggle, or like maybe Captain Ahab and the white whale, this big epic struggle. I don't think it needs to be that way. I really think that as human beings, we all want the same things for ourselves and our family. We want to educate, collaborate, have open dialogue, work with our city of Pittsfield to honor the nature of our zoning districts, preserve the residential qualities and the health and safety and secure aspects of our neighborhood that we came here for and that we continue to expect. We bought a home in a beautiful residential area, not expecting a cell tower would go up against it. We also want to ensure notification is provided so everyone has a voice at the table, and we want to prevent what happened to us from happening elsewhere in the city and in the world. So next slide, please. Get on the same page with your city. The Community Development Board's mission is to enhance the viability of the community as a desirable place to live and work through sound urban planning practices. It's not sound urban planning practices to put towers outside people's houses. So again, get to know your city's zoning and ordinance and mission and ask them to partner with you. Be a partner. We don't have to be adversarial. I want to partner with Verizon. I want to partner with Farley White. I want these people to be my best friends. I want us to work together to find constructive, collaborative, safe solutions. And I believe if we partner, there is a way. Now, the responsibility for Pittsfield is to ensure the economic development and planning and housing activities for the city of Pittsfield. So we want to make sure we call them on their obligations. Next slide, please. Now this is Arrowhead. Here's a historic Herman Melville's house, and it's home of the Berkshire County Historical Society, and they write letters all the time. And maybe you have this in Brazil. They write letters all the time asking for cell towers to not be built under NEPA laws, not be built where they could blight national historic treasures. Okay, so next slide, please. So I was talking a little bit earlier about the 877 South Street address and how it's deceptive. And this is a very common telecom practice to use deceptive addresses that are not indicative of the actual construction place at all. So if you look at the road, so you can look where that road divides that picture. It says Hillcrest Dental Care, and right across is the entrance to 877 South Street. You follow that long driveway and you see their building. Now you see the little red arrow and you see the little round water tower right there. That's where they built the cell tower. There's no road connecting the two. And there's no way to know that one would affect the other. It's not an appropriate place for a cell tower. And you can call out your municipalities and let them know that there are more appropriate places for them to site these towers. Next slide, please. Now, as you can see, the Verizon permit is pulled for residential R43 low density one family land. It's adjacent to zone R12 residential land. Know your zoning ordinances and ask that residential qualities of neighborhoods are consistent. Now, we can't have things like windmills. We can't even have a two-family. I couldn't put an accessory dwelling unit in my backyard for my elderly parents. I couldn't do that. But I can have a 150-foot cell tower outside my house. So call people on the discrepancies. Okay, next slide, please. Now, 5G is not necessary for life, and it's not necessary for first responders. This is the Verizon's coverage map showing full 4G coverage to the area prior to the cell tower. Why we need to add additional infrastructure when we have full coverage? Being able to play games faster, or being able to download movies instantaneously versus other instantaneously, this is not a need that we, right? There's not like a human need to have these things. And so if it costs the health of people in a neighborhood and you get a second faster download speed, it's not worth it. So you can show, does the tower, this is a great question for your planning boards. Does the tower need to be placed here? What are you trying to accomplish with this permit? And does it need to be placed here? The answer in our neighborhood was, we just want to have more. And to me, that's not an answer. And if I was sitting there in 2017 with the Zoning Board of Appeals, I would have said this is not acceptable. But my voice wasn't notified. I wasn't at the table. So next slide, please. Now, we spoke to real estate agents, and they said that 94% of people in a survey in New York said that if they had the opportunity to choose a house with a cell tower or without, 94% of people would choose the house without a cell tower. That is common sense. People don't want to live next to towers, not just because of health concerns, but there's aesthetics, there's public safety reasons. Cell towers are eyesores. They do obstruct cherished views. They can also attract crime. They're potential noise nuisances, and they're fire and fall hazards. Right now, our municipality does have the power to regulate the placement of towers. FCC wants to take that away, but while municipalities do have control, we need to do everything in our power to protect our residents and our home values. Okay, next slide, please. This is our cell tower. It's called a compound. As you can see, it's got a chain link fence and it's got barbed wire on the top. This is where my children ride their bike, and this is where they go sledding and play with their friends. And as you can see, there is nothing residential or beautiful about this. There is nothing that has enhanced our neighborhood. You can see the beautiful trees around this tower. This was like an old growth forest. This was beautiful reclaimed land from the Herman Melville farm, and all of it was cleared in order to create this infrastructure. And what we're noticing is we were in an area where we had deer and bear and fox and coyote and abundant birds, falcons, owls, you name it. We had it here. I don't see anything up here anymore. It's very, very sad that the wildlife around this tower has disappeared. Next slide, please. These are industrial components, and they don't belong in a residential neighborhood. Next slide, please. Compound signage. Does this belong in a residential neighborhood? Stay back. Radio frequency energy may exceed exposure limits, but nobody here gets to take the meter readings to tell you that they may expose you to excessive limits because there's no oversight committees protecting us. So here's the notice. It tells you the safety guidelines. It tells you that these are transmitting. This is pulsed wireless radiation, so it does a lot of harm to our biology. But again, they'll just average out those meter reads and say, it's okay. Maybe on the Massachusetts Department of Public Health website, it says sometimes these towers can't be differentiated from the ambient radio frequency radiation that's already in the environment. Well, we're not in New York City. We're in little rural Pittsfield, Massachusetts, a city of 40,000 people. And our meters could pick up this tower and differentiate it from background natural Earth's radiation. You know, the information that's out there it's bordering on ridiculous. So if we have to let people know that these things are dangerous, they don't belong in neighborhoods. Next slide, please. Now, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, they actually, if you go to their website, they consider a cell tower a hazard and a nuisance. It says that appraisals, people who come out to check the price of properties must indicate whether the dwelling is next to one or not. The appraiser is instructed to note and comment on the effect of marketability resulting from the proximity to such site hazards and nuisances. If you were looking to get a mortgage, would you be able to do so on a property next to a cell tower? I don't know. Next slide, please. Now, this was the National Institute for Science, Law, and Public Policy survey, where the overwhelming majority of respondents said that they would not live next to a cell tower, right? 79% of them, no way would they ever purchase or rent a property within a few blocks of a cell tower or an antenna, and that it would impact the price that people would be willing to pay for it. Next slide, please. And here's just more data from that study. So, you know, if you could rent or buy, the majority of people say that they would not. Now, our real estate agents here know that beautiful Berkshire County is going through a market boom with COVID. People are leaving Boston and New York City, and they're flocking to the Berkshires, and they're buying up these properties. The real estate agents have told us there is always a buyer for every house. And there will always be someone who does not believe in the wireless radiation science that is out there who will purchase your home. So we have seen houses sell here in our neighborhood as people have left. We have had people price low because of the cell tower and take a hit in order to sell it faster. And we've seen people put their house on the market in September, and they've dropped the house price $10,000 in October, $10,000 in November, $10,000 in December, and they've had to give it away because houses that did not have a view of the cell tower went for $85,000 more. So we're definitely seeing it affect the real estate prices here. We might have one house that could be an anomaly, but I'll keep you posted about that one. So next slide, please. 89% people said that they were generally concerned about increasing the number of cell towers and antennas in their neighborhood. So again, you know, we've got the statistics to back this up. We can use this information when we are advocating for towers to not be placed next to residential areas. Next slide, please. I love this quote from this appraisal company. In 32 years of experience as a real estate appraisal, specializing in detrimental conditions, taking adverse impacts and right of way, I found that aesthetics have the largest impact on property values. As a result, proximity to towers of all types has an impact on property values. Now, it's interesting because we've had houses that are closer to the cell tower but have an obstructed view because of the trees sell faster than what we have towers farther away, but you have a full, beautiful view of that cell tower. So I think for some people, everybody's different. When we talked about that, everybody has something that they might not like about a tower. For some people, out of sight, out of mind. If I can't see it because it's hidden behind a tree, it's okay, even though I live closer to it. But if I'm on my back deck having coffee and that's all I see, I'm going to be kind of agitated about it. So it's interesting where people fall on that category of concern. Next slide, please. Talk about blighting the landscape. I mean, these things are industrial structures that are eyesores and simply do not belong next to houses. Next slide, please. Again, here's just a study in examining invisible urban pollution and its effects on real estate value in New York City. One of the biggest growing industries is EMF protection. How do we protect ourselves if we do live in New York City and people are sleeping in Faraday cages? You know, they're buying shielding materials, they're buying like the clothing, they're buying the paint, they're doing everything that they can. An increasing number of people who are educated and who have the money are moving out of cities into the country to get away from these cell towers, and people who are really smart buy acreage. So that way, you know, they have a long driveway. So if they happen to put equipment on a pole, your house is set back so far, you've created your own residential setbacks. Now, this is not affordable, right? For the majority of hardworking people. I was a preschool teacher. I made $12.97 an hour. Very hard to buy a big estate in the, you know, but this is what educated people are doing because they are concerned about cell tower radiations. And you see property values decreasing up to 20%. Next slide, please. Now, New Zealand also did a big property institute study. You probably have this information. Again, just echoing these concerns. People don't want to live next to towers and they pay less money for it. And in Australia, it's interesting. They did a study in Brisbane, and what they actually proposed was that if they were to build a tower next to a residence, that they would compensate the property owner 20% to make up for the deficiency. I don't know if they ever went through with that proposal, but I thought it was a fascinating, you know, we'll pay you some money to put it here to reduce that impact. So next slide, please. New York Times had a great pushback against towers. Again, if you can see a buyer's dismay over the sight of a cell tower near a home just by their expression, even if they don't say anything. The neighbors closest to the tower listed their home. They had an open house, and we literally watched cars drive up the street, see the tower, turn around and drive down. It was like this revolving doorway of like, geez, we're that close? Never mind. We don't need to go inside to see it. You know, next house. Next slide, please. Cell towers do catch fire. People on Facebook ask me, how often does this happen? The day I had to do this presentation, a cell tower caught on fire, proving my point that it happens all the time. Next slide, please. Here's more tower fires. Now, these were not fires that were deliberately set. These were just towers because they have electrical components that are exposed to the elements, and they do go up in flames. Do you want this right next to your house? I wouldn't know how the fire department would deal with this right next to my house, how they would access the road. The 4,000-foot road from Farley White to the top of the tower was not snow plowed at all this winter. So if there was a tower collapse or a tower fire, there was no maintenance to those roads. There was no way for people to access that to be able to do something about it. And that worries me as a parent so close to it. Next slide, please. And here's close-up views. What is this putting out in the neighborhood if these things catch on fire? More toxic chemicals? I don't know. Next slide, please. And here was the recent tower fire, that we had just presented. Here you go, June 26, 2020 at 4:14 a.m. in the morning, a cell tower in Hanover catches fire. Next slide, please. Now, here's an interesting story really close to home. We have a mountain, Florida mountain, just in the hill towns here in Western Massachusetts. Now, a 150-foot tower collapsed, and it struck a second tower. And North Adams Tower Company sued Verizon for about $500,000, saying that Verizon negligently performed construction, maintenance, repairs, and modifications to the tower. These people build these towers. They want them up and on, and they are not caring about our safety. And once it's up, they never have to maintain it. So these towers on the top of Florida Mountain were looking like they were kind of in a bad way. Like they needed to have some additional guy wires coming from them. And North Adams Tower Company had repeatedly said, hey, we need somebody to come up and maintain. And Verizon never did. Now, back in March 2016, there was a big wind gust like this, and the tower fell over. And they said the wind was so strong, but the weather report said it was a normal wind gust. It was not a big storm. This was not like an act of God. So the tower that was wonky fell over into the other tower, and then it had to go to court for $500,000. I don't want this in my neighborhood. Next slide, please. And here's pictures of that Florida Mountain Tower collapse. Next slide. More photos. Next slide. So this is really interesting. Municipalities, if you call somebody out on a tower permit, this is an industrial abandoned mill. They wanted to build a tower, and you can see there's no homes next to this. They wanted to put the tower on the smokestack or behind it so it would be concealed. This was AT&T applying for a permit. This is an industrial area. It needed reception. There was known gaps in service. But 47 neighbors signed a petition and spoke up against it, saying that they didn't want to blight this old abandoned mill. AT&T, because they were asked the question, do you need to have the tower here in this location, withdrew its permit, withdrew the permit. So sometimes simply by asking the right questions, you can have a permit withdrawn, even with only a handful of neighbors complaining, but you need to know about it. So always be checking your municipal offices. Know the person in your community who's responsible for cell tower applications, and be checking weekly, monthly, have somebody in your community whose job it is to tell you where they want to permit the towers, because asking the right questions can make a difference. 3 people showing up to this meeting can make a difference between having a cell tower in a location or not. So next slide, please. So this old mill is right around the corner here in Pittsfield on Pontuzic Lake. The proposal was discovered by accident. John Dixon, who was working at the Berkshire Historical Society getting letters about tower applications in sensitive areas, was at his desk and opened a letter and said, "My God, I know that address. It's very close to my home. That could be practically my backyard." And because he worked for the city of Pittsfield, he was able to learn about the tower permit. He was able to educate his neighbors. They were able to create a petition, and they were able to attend the permitting meeting and tell them why they didn't want the tower in that location, and AT&T withdrew it. But again, we need to be sending certified notification to all abutters, and it didn't happen in his case. It didn't happen in ours. And because I don't work for the city of Pittsfield, I didn't discover it. So we were the ones left with the tower. They're the ones with no tower. Next slide, please. I think this is my last one. You can only ask questions or comments if you know about it. So make sure you know about it and get involved early. Next slide, please. If we can protect industrial property from blight, we should be doing the same thing for our residential properties too. We discovered that here in the city of Pittsfield, they started building commercial solar arrays next to homes, and people felt uncomfortable with that level of infrastructure. So they actually banned commercial solar arrays from residential areas. They said, you know, you can have the solar that sits on your house, but you know those big solar fields that are like enormous, like just rows and rows and rows and rows? They said people don't like living next to that infrastructure because it's kind of ugly. And even if you put a nice, fence around it, people can still see it and they don't want to see it. But it's okay to see a cell tower that actually creates harm. Solar power creates solar. That's great. Cell towers create RF emissions, which harm people, planet, and pollinators. We shouldn't be putting this in residential neighborhoods. So call out your zoning boards on incongruencies in what they permit. If you understand them, you can outsmart them. And that's a great strategy. So next slide. So when you want to object to a tower, you can do it for many ways. We had a tower that was planned on going up, I believe, in Williamstown, one of the towns up from here. And essentially people just said that it would have an adverse effect on the scenic view. And the tower was denied for that reason. So again, if you're a voice and you make your voice loud and clear and heard, even if you care about health and environment and you can't use that as an argument, you can use other things like an adverse effect on historic resources, scenic view, residential property values, and natural and man-made resources. Again, this tower got denied. Next slide, please. Oh, and here's the solar regulations, right? Here's the quote: commercial arrays have different impacts and don't belong in residential areas, Director of Community Development Deanna Roofer says. But she says cell towers next to homes are cool. This is an inconsistency. Call your cities out on inconsistencies within their codes. She says you're essentially changing the land use and plopping a manufacturer down in the middle. Rivers Murphy says of commercial arrays. And that's exactly what you're doing. We have something here called Euclidean zoning. Euclidean zoning says that each zone is zoned for a reason and should be protected. Residential areas should be protected, and you shouldn't be able to change the use to put a manufacturer such as Verizon in the middle of it. Next slide, please. And again, we wish we didn't have to have cell phones or use this technology, but especially given the pandemic, we understand the reality that this is our world. We want to let people know that we want to partner with them. We're not against towers. We're not against technology. But what we are for is the safe use of it, the informed consent around it, the education around the health effects, and the better siting of them. This is not a matter of trying to restrict whether it's solar or whether it's cell towers or whether it's any other infrastructure, but to deal with it in a way that everyone can feel comfortable where it ends up. The next slide, please. So see, we never had signage like this. You can ask your municipality if they're going to build a cell tower, not just to have it in a little 1 inch by 1 inch ad where they have to legally post it. Ask them to invest $50 for a yard sign that plonks down where they want to build the tower, so people who are invested in that community, who walk their dogs, who ride their bikes, who take that path to work, know that this is a proposed site for a cell tower, and ask them to use non-industry jargon. Our notification in the paper that was this big said proposed wireless facility. It did not say 150-foot cell tower. I think cell tower would be recognizable by most people. Wireless infrastructure, I don't know what that is. Is that a little building? I don't know. A sign like this would have created notification. If you don't have this in your municipality, ask for this. Mailings are one way to do this. Signage, text message, call ring arounds, and ways that people get their information is another. Next slide, please. Sending things certified mail is really important. Not everyone lives in the town where they own. Not everyone reads the newspaper. Not everybody talks to their neighbors to be able to get this through word of mouth. Ask your municipality to have proof of mailing, so that way everybody receives the information and your municipality can't say, well, we sent it, you must have thrown it out. I'm sorry, that's not good enough. Okay, next slide, please. Again, deceptive addresses. We heard this in Verona, New York. We heard this in other Massachusetts communities that we've been advocating for. Who would know a South Street address would impact a Holmes Road neighborhood? Not our city councilors, not even the workers. They couldn't figure out how to access the tower. We need to make sure people know where the tower will be located, not just its mailing address, its physical address. So advocate for that. Next slide, please. And know that these, give people examples what they can do. We talk a lot about, oh gosh, we can't do this or we can't do that, but show them what is possible. 1,500-foot setbacks, 3,000-foot setbacks, these exist in Massachusetts. Give them examples of zoning ordinances that you would like your city to emulate. Be a leader in this. Next slide, please. And thank you for your time and consideration. I know it was a lot of information to take in. Some of this you may have heard before. Some of these strategies might be new, but whatever is useful for you today from this live broadcast, take this information back, talk to your neighbors about it, talk to your family about it, have these conversations over the dinner table. Pick one or two of these that you guys think that you can do effectively that will move the needle the most, and take the ball and run with it. Yeah, any questions on that? That was a lot of information.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you for all your...
That was amazing. Lots of legal arguments you can use as well.
Yes.
Yes. I think the experience in Pittsfield may inspire many other cities, not just in the United States, but in other countries, how a community can reach more information, to know more about the reality of that tower. I really appreciate like the facts you showed about the real estate facts of 94% of people would prefer to have a house without a cell tower. So that's very important to people to know. So thank you very much. We are a little bit over in our time. I would thank you, Daniela and Sylvia, if you want to say like your last message for us.
Thank you so much, Courtney, for your presentation. It was very interesting, very informative. And I think people here in Brazil have to watch your live, because I believe most people here don't realize the impacts that cell phones have on their health. And I believe not everybody, but I think most people are not concerned about having a cell tower in their schools, in their hospitals, next to their houses, because really they have no idea what is going on. So I think your presentation was very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for the work in advocacy, because you don't want to discover that you're the person who's harmed by radiation by having the tower go up and then getting sick. We need to get in front of these issues. So thank you all for being a voice.
Thank you, Courtney. Hi. Thank you very much. That was very informative, and it was good to know that we, with a few people, you were doing something, you know, getting the steps through, and hopefully everybody starts to hear more everywhere around the world, and things can change in the future for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that's why we share our story, right? We share it so not to be like, oh my gosh, 13 people in this neighborhood were harmed by wireless radiation, but to take action. We say policy change is our love language. And it's the only thing that we will accept is that protections are put in place so that this does not happen to anyone else.
Thank you. Courtney, do you guys have a Facebook web page, right?
We do. So, yep,
I-
we're Pittsfield Cell.
I put here the address. I think it's this one, Pittsfield Cell. That's it?
Correct.
So you guys can reach this Facebook page and get in touch with the community and all the experience. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.